everybody and welcome back to Natalie Reads. My name is Natalie and welcome to my April wrap-up. So in this video I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in April. I had an incredibly successful reading month and I'm very proud of how much I read. However, because I have not done a wrap-up all year, I'm going to start this video by just listing all of the books I gave this year and what star rating I gave them, just so you have an idea of what I've read so far and how I liked it, but I'm not going to do reviews of those books because it would just be too much given that I've done no reviews so far this year. So I have my reading spreadsheet pulled up and we're going to go through all of the books. First up, I read the All for the King series by Nora Sakavic and I gave all three of those books 4.5 stars. I read Finale by Stephanie Gardner, which I gave 5 stars. Kingdom of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair was a 3.5 stars. Air of Fire by Sarah J. Maas was a 5 stars. Blitzed by Alexa Martin was a 4 stars. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne was a 4 stars. I reread the Hidden Legacy series by Alana Andrews and I gave all of those books 4 stars. King of the Court by R.S. Gary was a 3 stars. Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan was a 4 star. I read a bunch of One Piece, which I'll go through after this. Twisted Hate by Anna Huang was a 4 star. J City by Fonda Lee was a 4.5 stars. Lauren Olympus by Rachel Smith was a 4 star. To Love Jason Thorne by Ella Mays was a 3.5 stars. As Was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie was a 4 star. Dreamland by Sarah Destin was a 4.5 stars. School for Good and Evil was a 4 star. I read Brutal Prince and Stolen Air by Sophie Lark. Brutal Prince was a 4 star. Stolen Air was a 4.5 stars. Corrupt by Penelope Douglas was a 4 star. Pestilence, War, Famine, and Death were all by Laura Thalassel and I gave them all 3.5 stars. Throttled by Lauren Asher was a 3 star. Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Gardner was a 4 star. 3-Act Tragedy by Agatha Christie was a 3 star. Breathe Annie Breathe by Miranda Kennelly was a 4 star. And that brings me to April. So I believe I read up to volume 13 of One Piece in the beginning of the year. And I gave all of those volumes like 4 or 4.5 stars. I find it hard to rate volumes of One Piece because they're not a lot of the times one contains story. First, maybe 6 volumes I'd say were 4 stars, but now all of them have been 4.5 stars pretty much since. So, let's talk about April. So in April I participated in 2 readathons, Realmathon by Covers with Cassidy and Magical Readathon by Book Roast, and I would say I did very successful. For Realmathon, I don't exactly have something necessarily to neatly wrap up because I was just reading books and getting points for the books, so it's like not necessarily I can talk about the books I read because those are the books I read. But for Magical Readathon, I do have stuff to talk about. So I was going for the God Seer Calling, which means I had to read 7 classes: Astronomy, Inscription, Cyanox and Divination, Restoration, Conjuration, Demonology, and Lore. And I would like to say I was successful, so I completed my first spring semester. So obviously in the fall I will have a lot more books to read, which I am very nervous about, but I think I was smart with my choice, but I don't know. So I read 12 books in April, which amounted to 3,505 pages. I read 1 contemporary, 9 fantasy, and 1 romance, 8 adult books, 2 middle grade, 1 new adult, and 1 YA. And I gave 6 4.5 stars, 4 3 stars, 2 3.5 stars, and nothing below 3.5, which I would say is pretty good. So let's get into the books. So the first things I read this month were volumes 13 through 19 of One Piece, and these covered my inscription prompt, which was read an intimidating read, and my restoration prompt, which is reading a book featuring healers. So One Piece intimidates me because it's this huge epic long series that's just so big and I've barely scratched it yet. And then a few of the volumes that I read this month had doctors as main characters, so doctors, healers, same chance. I'm really enjoying One Piece and seeing how it's progressing. They've started their journey on the Grand Line and I'm in the Alabasta saga and I find it really interesting. I'm really liking this plot with this like organization that you don't really know what's happening, the spies, the secret identities. Really enjoying this, really enjoying seeing all the character building and finding more about the characters and their different values. Really enjoying it and so exciting to continue on. So then I read A Shadow in the Ember for Demonology. Demonology was to read a book with the word shadow in the title, so I would say that one worked out pretty nicely. I have mixed feelings about this book. So in this book we're following Sarah, who has been promised ever since she was born to become the consort for the Primal of Death. One of her ancestors hundreds of years ago made a deal with the consort of Death where he would help save their land in exchange for the firstborn daughter of the Empires as his consort, and Sarah is the firstborn daughter of Empire, which means she has to be his consort. However, she is not just being trained to be his consort, she's also being trained to kill him, and to do this, she needs to become his one true weakness. The only way Primal can be killed is by falling in love, so she must make him fall in love. This book is slightly different than what the synopsis says. You know, from that synopsis, you think you're gonna get the story of this girl trying to make this guy fall in love with her. Not exactly working out that way. I feel weird spoiling it, given that the stuff does happen in the prologue, but I've said enough. I think this book was interesting in some ways. So there wasn't a ton of world building about the world Sarah lived in. Like, there was some ancient history stuff, but not as much about present day, which is a bit confusing. And most of the world building was done through dialogue, which I hated. It was like so much of it was just done through dialogue with Sarah talking with this one character. And this was a problem I had with A Crown of Gilded Moons that did actually lead me to DNFing that book, which is a shame. I hope that problem wouldn't be the case anymore, so I'm not quite sure if I'm going to continue on with this series. Sarah was also very similar to Poppy. However, I do feel like as the book went on, she was developed in her own way that made sense with her personality traits. And in some ways, I would say some of the personality traits that Sarah and Poppy shared made more sense with Sarah's past and who she is as a person and her values. So I found that interesting. But there were many similarities to them that just maybe makes me think JLA has a type when it comes to writing protagonists, and I don't know about that. I thought the romance in the book was nice and believable. However, the ending of the book has a trope which I hate. I realized it this year that I dislike this trope so much, and unfortunately it can severely hinder my enjoyment of a book and has made me question whether or not I do want to continue on with this book. Also, in the last bit of the book, this fantasy plotline more starts coming in, which is fine. It's just not exactly the most interesting thing in the entire world, which is also making me question how much interested I am in continuing in this book, so we'll see. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I gave it a 3.5 stars. Next up, I read A World Without Princes, which is the second book in the School for Good and Evil series, and this book was for my astronomy prompt to read a book that was on the top of your TBR, and this book was definitely on the top of my TBR when I read it. So, in the School for Good and Evil, we follow Agatha and Sophie, who are two friends that live in a village where every 4 years, 2 children go missing. One good and one not so good. Not necessarily evil, but definitely an outcast from the village. And everyone suspects that Sophie and Agatha are going to go missing this year. Sophie is a princess, basically. She can't wait to get out of this town. She wants to marry a prince. She hates her life. And Agatha is not evil. She's just different. She lives in a graveyard. Her best friend's a cat. And so people think, yeah, she's going to be the one that gets taken. And the rumors are that these 2 children every year, or every 4 years, are taken to the School of Good and Evil, where they learn how to either become the hero or a villain in a fairy tale. Sophie and Agatha are friends because Agatha is Sophie's good deed. Sophie becomes friends with Agatha to show that she is a good person. She's friends with even people who are different, but they've formed a stronger bond. And on the night that the 2 children are supposed to be taken, it is indeed Sophie and Agatha, except for they are taken to the wrong schools. Sophie is in the School for Evil, Agatha is in the School for Good, and they both know this is horribly wrong and they must get back to their proper places. So yeah, I enjoyed this book. I think I enjoyed it less than the first book, but I still gave it 4 stars. Agatha and Sophie's relationship is very interesting and complex, and I really enjoyed seeing it. Some of the romance aspects from the first book carried over into this one. I definitely don't have as much to say about this one, as this was more one I was just reading for pure enjoyment. This is a reread. I read this series when I was younger and I absolutely enjoyed it. And I can't exactly explain why. I adore fairy tales. I love reading stories that are about fairy tales or retellings of fairy tales, as I'll talk about in another book later. And so it was just really nice to be immersed in this world again and experiencing all the fairy tale glory. So 4 stars to this one. Next, I read A Touch of Darkness for the lore prompt, which was read a book inspired by mythology. And this book is very inspired by Greek mythology. In this book, we are following Persephone, who is the goddess of spring, except for she has been hidden away for most of her life. Her mother has kept her secluded, except for Persephone, for her college years, was able to convince her mom to let her go out into the world for the first time and experience life. One night, Persephone goes with one of her best friends to a gambling club that Hades runs downtown, and she accidentally makes a deal with Hades. And if the deal is she has to make life grow in the underworld in the next 6 months, or else he gets her soul. And this is a challenge because Persephone, despite being the goddess of spring, has never grown anything in her entire life. In fact, she only kills things. So this is a book about her trying to grow stuff, as well as the relationship between her and Hades. The thing that really shines in this book is the relationship between Persephone and Hades. Seeing the 2 of them develop this connection and everything that they go through is really neat and makes it very, very believable. I will say this is the third time I've read this book, which is probably not a good thing because I didn't love it as much this time around. It just wasn't everything that I completely remember it being. Some of the fantasy plotline I just was bored by, and some of the romance too. It was just like, okay, y'all two obviously like each other. Can't y'all just accept this and move on with your life? So I gave it 4 stars. I'll definitely be continuing on with the series. And I do think it's going to get more plot strong in the next few books, meaning that there's going to be a plot and it's hopefully going to be stronger than it was in this book. Next, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells for Science and Divination, which was to read a book set in the future. Now, for being honest, I don't exactly know if this book is set in the future. I don't even know if it's set in our world, but I'm assuming because it's a sci-fi with like robots and space travel that it is set in the future, and I'm just gonna gamble that it's set in our world. I could be completely wrong, but it's what I think, so I'm obviously right. So in this book, we're following a murderbot who does not like murdering. He just wants to lay around and watch TV all day, and I've never related to a character more. Except for it's currently on this planet doing with a team that's been hired by doing this exploration of this planet that's like never been explored before, and things start to go wrong. Some of their equipment starts to malfunction and not work anymore. And then they discover that another team that is also on this planet has been all brutally murdered by a bunch of murder bots also. So they have to figure out what's going on there. And our murder bot is just adorable. I really liked him. I mean, his characterization could have had more, but it was really interesting, this juxtaposition of this thing that everything thinks is a murder bot and should enjoy killing and has no emotions and is just like, I'm here to do my job. And he's actually this thing that loves to watch reality TV and gets anxious and thinks everyone is judging him for being a murder bot. And so you kind of see him start to come out and start to talk to people a bit more as the situation calls for, as he has to be honest with these people and convince them he's not trying to actually kill them. The plot was somewhat interesting. It wasn't necessarily the best, but it was interesting. There could have been a little bit more world building, if we're being honest. I was confused as to some things, but it was honestly a really nice, quick, short read that I was able to read very quickly and enjoyed. So I gave it 3.5 stars, and I definitely will be continuing on with this series. The final book I read for my magical readathon TBR was The Wishing Spell by Chris Colfer, which I read for The Conjuration. To read a book with the source of light on the cover, this has the sky on the cover. The sky is a source of light, according to my books. So in this book, we're following Alex and Connor, who have had a hard life. About a year prior to the start of this book, their father passed away very unexpectedly in a car crash, and both of the twins have been grieving and trying to find ways to move on from their father's death. Alex, she's smart, she's the one who's always in the front of the class, raising her hand, answering questions. Well, Connor can usually be found dozing off in the back of the class. However, the twins were raised on one thing, and they have one thing that is common between them, their love for fairy tales. They grew up hearing fairy tales from their father and their grandmother. And so that's why, on the twins' 12th birthday, their grandmother gives them her old book called The Land of Stories, which had all the fairy tales she used to read. Except for one day, The Land of Stories starts to glowing, and then the twins fall into it, and they discover The Land of Stories is real, and it's a fairy tale world. And they're trying to get home, and to get home, they have to make the wishing spell, which means they have to collect a bunch of artifacts from around the kingdoms, which will allow them to get home. These items are like Cinderella's glass slippers, a lock of hair from Rapunzel's tower, a jewel from Snow White's coffin, such things. And it's following the twins as they venture around the Land of Stories to get these things, but they're also in danger because the evil queen from Snow White, who has recently escaped, is also trying to collect these items. And when she finds out the twins are trying to get them, she's not going to be too happy. So I really enjoyed this book. It's a fun adventure story. The series does get, in my opinion, better as it moves on. The first 2 books are kind of adventure-y, kind of ish sameness, and then you get into more of an expanded plot that follows throughout multiple books and is really high stakes, because this book, while it's somewhat high stakes, you know everything's going to be alright because these are a bunch of 12-year-olds. They're not going to die in the first book in this series. So I enjoyed these. There's like a little twist at the end, which is a lot of fun as the kids are finding more stuff out about their family. I enjoyed this book. Is it my favorite thing? No, but nostalgia has a strong grip over me. This book, besides not being my absolute favorite, is part of a series that is one of my favorite series of all time. So this was a really nice book. It's a great introduction to the world, to lay ground for a lot of what's going to happen in future books. So I gave this 4 stars. The final book I read this month was not necessarily for anything in particularly. It was just a fun read, and that was P.S. I Like You by Casey West. This book is one that I had very fond memories of. This used to be one of my favorite books growing up, but rereading it was cute, but it was definitely not as good as I used to think it was. So in this book, we're following Lily, who is different. She's into music and she dresses differently and she has a crazy home life with a bunch of younger siblings who just drive her absolutely insane. But one day when Lily is in chemistry, she's doodling some song lyrics on her desk, and the next day she goes into class and someone has left her a note about the song lyrics on her desk. So she starts this pen palship with this person, but they don't know who each other are. And also throughout this book, she's dealing with this extremely annoying guy at school, Cade Jennings, who she has had a feud with for like forever. And he's just being so annoying and she can't stand him. And I'm sure we can all guess where this is going, but it's the story of Lily, her mysterious pen pal, and Cade Jennings. I liked this book. It's obviously, for me, I think the way I got into more enemies to lovers type stuff, because while they're obviously not enemies in this book, they don't necessarily like each other. But it wasn't great. Lily is very annoying and self-centered. She likes to focus on herself and only herself, which can be kind of frustrating to read about, especially when I'm older and I'm the same age as Lily, and I'm like, okay, you're being annoying, you're being self-centered, everything does not revolve around you. But besides Lily's annoyingness, the romance is cute and it's built up and it's like, oh, they actually like each other. Huge reveal. It's cute. That's really pretty much all I can say. It's cute. I think I put like 3.5 stars in for it, but I'm not sure. I don't know if I feel right rating this book because I did read it because of nostalgia and how much I loved it, and it's like, well, I guess it would make sense that I don't love it as much nowadays because I've grown as a reader. But yeah, so those were all the books I read in April. I would say I had a pretty successful reading month. I'm hoping for another successful reading month in May. We'll see what happens. My May schedule should hopefully be a lot opener than my April schedule, so we'll see what's happening. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Down below there will be links to all the books I talked about, as well as my Goodreads and my Instagram if you want to follow me there. Subscribe to see more content from me, and I'll see y'all in my next video very soon. Bye!